Hey everybody, welcome back to Video. So today we're going to be doing a series on the MiSTer FPGA D10 Nano project, and of course we're going to be talking about Nintendo 64 again, because Robert has finished active development and there are a few games that will not be working on the core in some way, shape, or form, and a lot of people have been asking me to go over the games that will not be working either completely or that may freeze. This video is exactly that. I'm going to show you what's not going to work on the Nintendo 64 core now that active development's been basically buttoned up. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But right off the top, one that is a bummer to a lot of people, and I totally understand why, is Conker's Bad Fur Day. Here is the good news though. You can play this game, and with saves and a little bit of practice, you can kind of navigate around the areas that seem to freeze consistently. Now, there can be random freezing, that is still a possibility, but it's not like you turn Conker's Bad Fur Day on and nothing works. You can get into the game, you can play a ton of it, and it may still be completable if you're very careful and just kind of persist around the freezing. It's not going to be the same experience as playing an original Nintendo 64 or using software emulation, but it is so very close to there, and maybe one day when there is a MiSTer 2, Robert may take a look at this again and finish up on the last few games. Nothing guaranteed, of course, it is just my presumption. But the nice thing is what is here works. The graphics are correct, the music is great. If it wasn't for the intermittent freezing, this would be another perfect game. And I totally get it. This is one of the most memorable and synonymous games with the Nintendo 64, especially later on in its life. And it comes to no surprise that basically some of the Rare games are causing the core to have trouble, because it seems like Rare just love doing things with the hardware and with the code that pretty much no other developer did. And honestly, if you can see this cutscene, I consider it a win. It has such a great sense of humor in the game. Some of it hasn't aged as well as it could have, but some of it still definitely holds up. But you'll see here, all of the footage you're watching is from the MiSTer FPGA Core. All of these levels, all of these areas are playable within the game. The cutscenes seem to work consistently for the most part. It's just the random freezing. You might be running around, hit a little splash of water, and it will freeze the game. You might be doing something completely different, and it might freeze there. You might be playing for hours and not see a single freeze. It is not consistent, and that's why this is so difficult, basically impossible to patch up, because there is no hint as to why it's happening in the first place, and because of that latency, it's probably something that would never work on MiSTer. So if you want to play Conker's Bad Fur Day on the core, I definitely recommend you check it out. Just make sure you save off it and expect to see some freezes, or maybe just use something like Ares, the software emulator, to do it. Now onto another Rare game that's just not going to be playable in any way, shape, or form on the current MiSTer FPGA core is going to be Force Gemini. With a little bit of trickery, you can get into the game. You're seeing the intro here now on MiSTer, and you can play around for maybe like 45 seconds to a minute until the game is going to hard lock. There really is no getting around that, and there really isn't any further into the game you can get. This footage right here is from MiSTer FPGA, just so you know, but this one introductory area is basically all anyone's ever seen of Force Gemini running on the core, and it just seems that Rare as developers did different things with the hardware, and that is why the two games that aren't working that you're seeing first and second are Rare developed titles. There's always a developer in every system that tries to do something a little bit differently, and that can lead to issues when you actually try to emulate it either in software or FPGA. And a lot of software emulators have had trouble with these games as well. Now we've moved over to Ares, the software emulator, just to talk a little bit more about the game. This is a fun one, although I would say it's nowhere near my favorite Nintendo 64 games of all time, so this one doesn't really bum me out all that much, but tell me down below what your opinion of Force Gemini is, because I would be curious. I would say 10 to 1 people would ask about Conker versus this game though. It's always been on people's minds as one of the games that didn't work, but no one was really in the comments saying that they were totally devastated that they were not going to be able to play Force Gemini. I would say this is probably Rare's weakest game on the system. I still think it's very good, but when you're Rare and you make some of the best Nintendo 64 games of all time, there definitely has to be one that takes the last place, and for me, Force Gemini does that. But that's just the reality of the situation, and the good thing is software emulation for these games does exist, and it is highly competent, and of course if you have real Nintendo 64 hardware, this is just one of those cartridges you keep around when you want to play it. but it will be interesting to see if this core ever sees active development again on a new FPGA board sometime in the future. What could be done, because I really do just want to know the ultimate answer as to what's going on under the hood with these rare games. Obviously it comes down to some form of timing and cycle accuracy, but how close does it need to be? Does it need to be 1 to 1? Can it be 0.99 to 1? I'm just really wondering how that's going to pan out, but that's just the curiosity in me. But again, it's just a thing. This is not going to be an experience you can have on MiSTer FPGA, but the library of playable games and the library of completable games is massive. I will leave a link in the description below to Vampir's website that shows you the games you can't play, because honestly I didn't put a few of them in here, like Mahjong. Now moving over to another game that freezes randomly and you're definitely not going to be able to complete, is going to be Resident Evil 2. And honestly, this one doesn't bother me whatsoever because we have Robert's PlayStation 1 core on MiSTer FPGA. And if anybody asks me where they should play this game, PlayStation 1 or Nintendo 64, I would tell them all day long to play the PlayStation 1 version. Of course, from a sense of pride, you want 100% of a playable library, and Robert tried to do that. But this would be the type of thing, if you sat down on your MiSTer and decided to play through Resident Evil 2 again, ask yourself, would you go with Nintendo 64 or would you go with PlayStation 1? Unless you have some pure nostalgia for this version of the game, I would assume almost everybody would default to the PlayStation Core. So honestly, this one not working does not bother me whatsoever because we have so many different ways to play this game, and that is always a good thing. And it is an interesting thing that this freezes as well. It has so many different resolution changes and so many things going on under the hood and so much compression when it comes to the FMVs. This definitely seems like the one game that would definitely be super sensitive to timing just based upon how much they've crammed onto the cartridge. I'm just presuming, I'm not stating facts, but honestly, it would be what I would think would be the problem. And if you do love this game, like I said, it is a bummer it doesn't work because obviously when this project started, everyone hoped for 100% completion. But I do love this note right here. It is Robert's note, and obviously if you don't know, FPGAZumSpass's first name is Robert, so I just put this in as a little nod to him because he has worked incredibly hard at getting all of these Nintendo 64 games to work on the core, and I know he was bummed out when he came up a tiny bit short just due to technological limits. So leave him a comment down below and tell him how amazing of a job he did. He does come in, he does watch these videos, and he does respond to them, and he loves seeing the positive feedback. So if you leave one comment on this video, make sure it is that one, because what I mean, he has busted his ever-loving ass to get this thing out the door in its current state. He's been working on this for almost a year, and he has done everything he can to give us an incredible experience. But if you want to play Resident Evil 2 on the current core, you can definitely load it up. You can see how far you get, but I can guarantee you, unless you have a lot of luck and a lot of saves, you're never going to see the end credits to this game on the current core, which, while being a bummer, isn't that big of a deal. Now let's move over to actual direct capture from MiSTer because that was all Ares footage, and you can see that you can get far into the first area of the game, but that's the thing about intermittent freezing. You never know when it's going to happen. You might be 2 hours into the game and it might freeze, you might be 2 minutes into the game and it might freeze, you might be 2 seconds in and it could freeze. So you can never really rely on this being a stable performing core for this game because it's just one of those things. It's going to freeze, it's a matter of when, not if. Now moving on to another game that just seems to have a freezing problem is going to be Gauntlet Legends, but the good thing is we have a PlayStation 1 version of that, which I would say is inferior to the Nintendo 64 version ever so slightly, but it is another game you're going to be 100% able to play on MiSTer FPGA, just not on the Nintendo 64 core. But honestly, if you're going to play one version of Gauntlet Legends, just emulate the arcade version, or if you're weird like me, go out and buy an original arcade board, because the arcade version has always been the best. But this is one that I know a lot of people are looking forward to, and this is definitely a disappointing one. Outside of Resident Evil being one of those things where I really don't mind, and this is more in the conquer category of I wish it did play, because it's a really fun game, it's a great 4-player experience, and it is just one of those unique titles for the Nintendo 64 on a platform that had so many racing games, so many platformers, and a lot of first-person shooters. Gauntlet Legends definitely felt like its own unique genre, and something you didn't see a lot on the Nintendo 64 when it was running back in the day and on retail shelves. So it is what it is. It's one of those things. This again might freeze in the first hour, might freeze in the fourth hour. You might be able to actually complete the game with a little bit of luck, because all of these issues are intermittent. What that means is you'll never know when it's going to freeze, and you never know what to expect. So somebody might get lucky out there and have some magical run and be able to see the end of this game. I don't expect that, but you know what? Weirder things have happened, so go ahead, try it, and if you're able to do it, tell me in a comment below. I don't expect anyone to actually try to do that, but it is a possibility. You never know what you can do. But Gauntlet Legends isn't one you're going to see the credits scroll on, but we have a couple other games to talk about, some of which honestly are a bummer, and others I do not care about whatsoever. But let's move on to another game that I think a lot of people are going to be bummed about, and that is Battle for Naboo. But I'm going to say something that'll probably light the comments up down below. I've never actually loved this game. I don't think it's a bad game whatsoever. It's just not my favorite Star Wars game on the system. Of the 4 titles that released, I would definitely put this in 4th place. So for me personally, I would have loved to have seen this run for all of you so you could have fun with it, and Robert could have hit that 100% mark. But as far as gameplay is actually concerned, this is another one where outside of testing it for the channel, it's not something I would have gone back and sat down with my MiSTer and played in my spare time. Because let me tell you, Bomberman Hero works 100% perfectly, and that's all I ever needed out of the core. All Bomberman Hero jokes aside, I get that this is going to be a lot of people's favorite game, so I am bummed out for you. I don't say that I don't love this game to try to rile things up. I just give you my honest opinions about titles and what I remember them being back in the day and what I think about them now. And again, with the intermittent freezing, you never know when it's going to come. And this is a game that got a lot of improvements when we got the 480p mode as well, that would take the raw frame buffer and output it before any of the VI pipeline. So it's a bummer that one of the games that benefited so much from that feature is a game that just really isn't going to be completable on the MiSTer FPGA Core. But that's just how these things work. Robert went in not even sure if this would work whatsoever. He was hoping to have one game playable by last Christmas, and he leaves this legacy of having this entire massive library like 98.9% playable, and the completion rate is going up as we speak. It's just that a lot of people have to go through and play a lot of shovelware on Nintendo 64 to see if it works. Now, a game that I expect only a few people to be bummed about is Polaris Snowcross. This will freeze basically in the first lap of any race, and that's one of the things that just happens. And I will say, playing this game again and having not thought about it for the longest time outside of this core, I actually found it to be more entertaining than I remember. This is definitely not going to be a San Francisco Rush or a Cruisin' USA or a Beetle Adventure Racing. It's going to be below all of those titles. But there is some fun to be had here. Now, I grew up in Vermont. We had snowmobiles all the time. I have done backcountry skiing, ridden snowmobiles in many different places, so I actually find snowmobiles a lot of fun. But as far as actually playing them on Nintendo 64 is concerned, it is kind of a take it or leave it situation. I would not trade this game for any of the other racing games we have on the system that I love. So it's one of those things. If this is your favorite game, it's just not going to be playable here. But if it's your favorite game, you probably have a Nintendo 64 and a cartridge sitting under your television, and you can just pop it on for that. But I'd rather play San Francisco Rush, Rush 2, Rush 2049, Beetle Adventure Racing, Mario Kart, any of those games any day of the week over Polaris Snowcross. So this is one, it's on the list as a game that's not playable. I did have more fun than I remember having with it back in the day, but it is just something that's not going to work, and we have to deal with that. Now, one that you either love or hate is Wonder Project J2, and this is actually an interesting entry because I'm going to link you to Vampire's website below. It seems that this has a problem in the normal core, but if you play it on the turbo core, it does not. And Robert is still working on the turbo core. It's going to get buttoned up with a release just like the stock core. So this is one of these things. I thought about including it in the video, then I thought about cutting it, but I figured I would tell you guys the current information. It seems that at least from documentation, this is something that's going to be playable in the turbo core only. Now, why is that? No one really knows. Sometimes you just have an observation, you notice something new, you write it down, but actually spending the time to try to find out why it happens isn't really time well spent. And this is a title, I've never played it from start to completion. It is translated into English, and I know a lot of people do enjoy it, so tell me down below if you've ever played Wonder Project J2. I would be very curious. I've always been intrigued by the game. It's always had this amazing art style, and I've always wanted to get further into it, but it just moves slow enough where I always think I could probably be doing something different with my time, and I put the controller down and move on with my day. So if there's any sort of secret into getting into this game, do tell me down below because I would be curious. but it's just a strange situation in which the turbo core seems to be okay, but the standard core does not. Maybe that'll change in the future, you never know what'll happen, but I do just love this game for the visual. It's so unlike the Nintendo 64, it is so unique, so even if you never play it, to see the credit scroll, definitely check it out on the turbo core, get a look at it because it just has such a vibe and such a non-Nintendo 64 look. It's a very unique title. Now speaking of unique titles, we're going to go to the last game in this video, and that is Iggy's Wrecking Balls. This freezes consistently on one course, and if this is your favorite game, I apologize, but I do not care that it freezes whatsoever outside of Robert not hitting that 100%. I've never understood this game, I've never been charmed by this game, half of the time it feels like it's playing itself. This is just not a title that I've ever had any interest in, so to find out that it freezes on the core and is never going to be completely playable really doesn't faze me whatsoever. Conker's a bummer, Jet Force Gemini is a bummer, Gauntlet Legends is a bummer, Resident Evil we have a different version of, Wonder Project J2 I've never finished it but I would be intrigued, but Iggy's Wrecking Balls honestly is right there with the Mahjong title that I didn't even capture because no one's going to try to play it, as far as things that really don't matter if they work or not on the current core. If this is your favorite game, I'm not making fun of it, don't leave me a comment down below angry, and you can love whatever you love, and if you're happy, I'm happy for you. But for me personally, Iggy's Wrecking Balls is a game I completely forgot even existed, and until this core testing started and people asked to see it. If this core hadn't been made, I would have forgotten still that this game was a thing. But that's the list of games that are not going to work on the Nintendo 64 core. There's a couple other very oddball games that you probably don't know exist, and those will be in the link below to Vampire's site. But honestly, we should focus on the fact that pretty much every heavy-hitting Nintendo 64 game outside of Jet Force Gemini and sometimes Conker's Bad Fur Day work on this core and work spectacularly. And I'm not done yet, I got a lot more videos and emulation comparisons on this, so we'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.